afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the regular Friday program of the City Club of Portland. I'm Bill Lesh, your president. I'd like to have you join me in welcoming several new members today, if you would, and hold your applause. They are seated, I hope, to my left. William Manny, attorney with Sussman and Shank. David McLean, manager of projects and environmental affairs, CE Exploration Company. And Mindy Morton, Director of Student Services at St. Mary's Academy. Welcome to the City Club. And I think I've insulted somebody who's a new member who's... Oh, well, we had one back here too. So, you know, being president of this organization, you can't ever get it quite right. So, I would like to thank Fred Haler and Kevin McMurdo, who were two of our recruiters for those groups. I would also like to urge any of you who are not members of City Club to consider joining. This is going to be a particularly exciting year with the political candidates coming down the road. We have a special program for Neil Goldschmidt in December in which he will kind of give a swan song from his time as governor. And I think that you would enjoy not only those programs but participating in our many committees. So I hope you would take a look at the membership information on your table and consider joining. Two announcements prior to our program. First is an open forum Wednesday, May 23rd, sponsored by the Human Services and Law and Public Safety Standing Committees. That open forum will feature Linda Bergman, Multnomah County Circuit Court Judge, and Dennis Maloney, who is Director of the Department of Community Corrections for Deschutes County. They will be speaking on youth in courts, noon to 1:30 at the United States Bank Tower, Bancorp Tower, 26th floor, conference rooms B and C, and that is free and open to the public, again, Wednesday, May 23rd. And next Friday, May 25th, Dr. Peter Kohlherb, who is president of Oregon Health Sciences University, speaking on OHSU as a research and healthcare university poised for development and the challenge it faces in the decade ahead. His talk will be entitled, OHSU, Facing the Challenges of the 90s. And that will be here at the Benson Hotel in the Mayfair room. On my far left is Marge Abbott, who is our board host today. She is a member of the Board of Governors and president of M. Abbott's and Associates. She will have the privilege of asking the first question of our speaker today. And to remind everyone, questions are from City Club members only. We give precedence to oral questions. There will be a microphone after the speech placed in the center of the room. If you are shy, there are forms on your tables for written questions. Please hold those up so the staff can pick them up and bring them forward. I'll warn you in advance, I'm a severe editor of written questions, so if you want an unedited question, you need to go to the microphone. And as always, remember, a question ends in a question mark. Our speaker today tells me that one immediate result of the recent legislative session has been the drop in his hate mail. Next to school finance, workers' compensation has probably been Oregon's most vexing political problem, and our speaker today has been one of the centers of that storm. In fact, the workers' compensation issue has been tops on most lists of those people that are trying to recruit new business to Oregon and work on economic development as one of the biggest, most serious problems we have about new business settling or starting here in this area. And so in the City Club's tradition of presenting speakers hot off the griddle, we present today Stan Long, who is president and CEO of SAIF Corporation. SAIF is a public corporation, nonprofit, specializing in workers' compensation insurance, for anyone who doesn't know. And the company is governed by a 5-member board of directors who are appointed by the governor. And then that board appoints the president and CEO, in this case, Mr. Long. Stan is a 4th-generation Oregonian. He has a Bachelor of Science from the University of Oregon and gained his law degree at Willamette University. He has been a partner in a Eugene law firm, a deputy attorney general, and served as director of the Department of Commerce. On November 1st of 1989, he was named to his current position as president and CEO of SAIF Corporation. Long will discuss the recent legislative reforms and their possible impacts on workers' compensation in his speech today. Will you help me welcome Stan Long? Stan?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. It is a pleasure to be away from the state's capital for the afternoon. On May 7th, an unprecedented thing occurred in Salem. News accounts referred to the product of a model special session as workers' compensation reform. I don't believe that's accurate. The legislature did not reform the workers' compensation system. They gave us a new one. A whole new system, in my judgment, was created. I'd like to spend my time entirely talking about it and the future, but in order to explain why I believe, at least from my perspective, we have something that qualifies as new instead of reformed, I need to tell you a little about the past, although I see in the audience a number of individuals who I know a great deal about the system. I'm also going to approach the discussion from not a technical standpoint, but rather from the standpoint of civics, that is to say, why do we do what we do, and what are the public purposes or objectives that have underlied Oregon's conduct over the last 75 years as we have attempted to find a way to resolve the problem of the worker who's injured in relation to his or her job. For 75 years, we've been trying to find the appropriate balance between our concern for that injured worker and the economic impact of handling that concern on the employer. Today, the system that we have created through an evolutionary process costs almost $1 billion a year, or roughly $300 for every man, woman, and child that lives in this state. And if you believe that cost is paid only by employers, then you must buy your products and services somewhere outside Oregon, for truly all of us pay that of that bill on about 6,000 cases, 1,000 cases a year at SAIF Corporation, but about 6,000 of them take 85% of the money. So the first thing in the system is or insurance industry profits or the like. Well, the facts are to the contrary. 1988 numbers for SAIF Corporation, the year I took over in November of that year, come to mind. Our budget was in the $50 million a year range for the entire operation, and claims costs for that year were $400 million. When you see $340 million attributed to about 6,000 cases in 1 year, you understand that you have a system in trouble. Now, I'll give you some brief statistics about Oregon that I believe justifies what the legislature attempted to do, and in my judgment did with great distinction. We had the highest frequency of claims in the United States. The highest frequency in the United States. Worse, among those claims, we had the highest frequency of claims that led to an award of permanent disability. We had the third highest average cost for medicine in the United States and the eighth high in premiums. Now, it is often said that we had high costs and low benefits. In order to understand why reform is not easy to come to, in other words, and understand why there can't be an easy consensus, you need to understand that that basic tenet, that common sense tenet, is false. Benefits in Oregon in terms of cash paid to injured workers are over 200% of the national average. Benefits to injured workers who were seriously injured, whose injuries fell on a schedule, were low, but taken as a whole, cash benefits to workers were about 220% of the national average. In addition, the cost of medicine is about 215% of the national average. The number of serious cases in Oregon for which disability awards were made was about 150% of the national average. Given those gross statistics, you can understand why our premiums were the eighth highest in the country, and you might wonder why they were not even higher. As depressing as those statistics were, Some people would want to believe that they result from the fact that Oregon workplaces were somehow more unsafe than the national average. That fairy tale probably helped prevent reform for a number of years. There's nothing inherently unsafe about workplaces in Oregon compared to the national average. What is different about Oregon, although not different from every state, what is different is that the politics of workers' compensation are an extreme variety of politics in my judgment, and I can say that as a former chairman of LCDC, a place that's known its own controversies. Nothing, in my experience, in and out of the government about 4 times now, is as politicized and polarized as workers' compensation. Because there's $1 billion roughly in cash moving about the system, you find some special interest groups in classic form that profit handsomely from claiming representational status for injured workers or business or both. Each time the Oregon system of making reform was attempted, that is to say, to have the participants come together and seek a consensus, you found a phenomenon that no one would give up anything significant. Reforms in my time were often ballyhooed as being fundamental, surely to save money, surely to be more fair, to raise benefits and the like. And when the results of those consensus products among special interests were played out in the marketplace, the price went up. In 1980, 6 injured workers out of 100 got a permanent partial disability award. In 1989, 12 injured workers out of 100 got a permanent disability award. The difference between 6 and 12 at SAIF Corporation is a cost of $114 million a year. Frequency, that is to say, how many injured workers out of 100 injured workers were going to get an award, was projected to climb to 13, 14, and 15. Cost to all Oregonians associated with that should reform fail to arrive, and arrive it did. What is it that brought us reform? A number of factors, and depending on your side of the issues, there are people standing in line to take the credit or blame for what occurred. In my judgment, there's enough to go around for everyone. The principal architect, I believe, of a better, more rational, and fair system is our governor. When reform did not occur in the last session, the governor called together the people for whom the system was created, or at least representatives of those, and asked that they try to achieve a new balance between the interests of business and the interests of labor. Now we could have disagreements the rest of the afternoon about whether that process was a fair one. I believe and assert that it was fair, and fundamentally so. The system was not created to provide handsome profits for insurance companies or lawyers or medical service providers. The system exists for the benefit of both business and workers who are injured by that business activity. There was great pressure to allow other interests to be involved in achieving a new balance. That pressure was resisted, and through that process, and having spoken with some of the participants, a very healthy relationship developed between business and labor that produced an objective bill, an objective proposal, parts of which I do not like, parts of which I like a great deal, all of which I respect because it is the product of the people whose interests are the most central to the outcome. I told the employees of SAIF Corporation after May 7th, when the system was changed, that we were at the end of the beginning. SAIF has had its financial difficulties. Those difficulties primarily are responsible for my tenure at SAIF. My principal job is to try to end those difficulties, and we're doing so. We're playing our part in helping ourselves. Reform will make the continuation of that job somewhat easier, and our employees now turn their attention to trying to implement a system that is, I think, a likely model for the rest of the United States, at least those areas of the United States where the kinds of problems we experience are going on now. I'd like to tell you a little bit about some of the main features of the bill in a conceptual way. There are people in this audience who can tell you of the precise legal changes and argue about their merits, but the first most important thing in the bill is that we have redefined what is an injury. One reason why our rate of injury is so high is we included within the definition of an injury having something to do with your employment a number of things that had very little to do with your employment. We, in effect, compensated people for the natural degenerative process and earned the label in the insurance industry around the country as the home of the Oregon back. That is, the back for which you can get an award of lifetime medical benefits for a 5% impairment of your back. Some of us in this room are over 25. Those of us who are all have at least 5% impairment of your back attributed to the aging process, yet in Oregon you could in effect receive compensation for that. The legislature, wisely I believe, has attempted to put an end to that. In addition, certain other consequences of injuries, that is to say, whether an injury can be aggravated or worsened and under what circumstances, have been restricted. Redefining what an injury is and making it closer related to on-the-job activities and to the risks that the business can control has been controversial. Some people say it is reform on the back of injured workers. Analytically, that is, of course, nonsense. The question is, what is an injury? And what is an injury that ought to be compensated for by tax on business activity as opposed to treated from some other source? I think a better balance has been achieved. There are other improvements in the bill that are controversial, although I think on balance quite good. For example, for the first time in Oregon, an injured worker who chooses not to be involved in endless and sometimes mindless litigation can opt to accept a settlement and exit the system. Oregon, for all of its history in workers' comp, has had a fear that workers could not conduct themselves in accordance with their own enlightened self-interest and would agree to settlements not in their interest. So we prevented them. There are those of us, and I am among that group, who believe that sort of paternalism is unjustified in most instances, at least in 1990. So we have a doctrine now called compromise and release. I think it's an improvement overall. Whether it's a money saver remains to be seen. My prediction is that it will reduce some of the expense of workers' compensation. I suppose the change that often involves the most professional activity, other than the lawyers, which I'll speak to in a moment, is managed health care. Oregon's had what I call an unmanaged health care system with respect to workers' compensation that set up certain anomalous situations. If you were a member of a union, and because of federal legislation, you would be part of a managed health care system if you were ill. If you became ill, you would go to a managed care organization of one type or another. If you were injured, you had the right to go wherever you want, basically, and get whatever treatment you wanted from an MD, an osteopath, a chiropractor, a nurse practitioner, or a faith healer. By being able to carry out the doctrine of free choice, you had this anomalous situation in Oregon where if you were ill and the objective was to get well, you would go through a managed health care system. If you were injured and the objective apparently was to get an award, you would go through an unmanaged health care system. That finds a situation where many millions of dollars in care changes hands and where the quality of care is not necessarily in balance with the amount of money paid. Well, Oregon is now going to have essentially treatment for injured workers in a managed care environment. The precise details of that arrangement are going to be dependent upon rulemaking activity by the Department of Insurance and Finance and by the terms of contracts between insurance carriers and healthcare organizations. My hope is, and my belief is, that the existence of that system will actually increase the amount of time or the number of times in which we get good results as opposed to poor results with respect to getting a worker back to work. The fact is we do have illness behavior. The fact is some people do become dependent upon medical services when they should not. And the fact is that the most beneficial thing, according to my value system, for an injured worker is to be able to return to work. That philosophical objective, I believe, is the underpinning of the change from the doctrine of free choice to the almost exclusive use of managed care organizations to deliver those medical services. Now, I suppose that there are as many people involved in workers' comp today on the other side of the issue who would stand up and say we have done something fundamentally unjust in that we have somehow created a company doctor system where the interests of injured workers won't be served. I do not believe that is so. I personally supported and commend both the Mahonia Task Force and the legislature for preventing insurance companies, such as the one that I work for, from operating the managed care organizations. That's not our job. Our job is to contract with them and to provide the best care we can afford in accordance with the judgment of professional managers who are skilled in the management of medical delivery. So when you hear wailing at the wall that we now have company doctors, understand that just won't pass muster when you examine the bill itself. We will contract with organizations who are separately run and not under our control to deliver services in accordance with utilization and practice standards developed by others. And to me, I think we'll care for workers better, and we'll see to their future better, and we'll be able to manage the cost in a better fashion. Now, people will ask invariably, how much will these kind of changes save? Well, there are some intangibles that cannot be predicted. For example, today, the Oregon system is very litigious. And having spent about 20 years of my life in the courtroom as a lawyer myself, it's hard for me to say that all litigation is bad. Certainly, too much litigation is bad. Too much litigation is too expensive and too likely to produce untoward results. The Oregon workers' comp system had too much litigation, in my judgment. The people who crafted this proposal, I think, believed in that same proposition. And now we have what I call medical arbitration to solve many of the problems we had about the nature of treatment and the nature of impairment. One of the consequences of that will be less work for some. One of the consequences will also be more timely decisions, and I hope better decisions in terms of the interest of the worker. Now, every time we've made a change like this in the past, almost every time, those changes backfire. You get a series of interpretations that leave you something less than you thought you had. In 1987, I watched some dedicated legislators pass standards by which impairment of workers are rated. Before that process was concluded, we all believed that there was going to be an improvement in the workers' comp system. By the time the cases had worked their way through the hearing system and through the courts, standards were no longer standards. They applied to some and not others. This legislation reintroduces the concept of treating the same situation the same, even though the individuals may be different. What are the challenges ahead, and what can we expect? After the '87 legislation, which did not live up to its advanced billing, I think there were about 110 bills introduced to make technical adjustments. Read that as rollbacks of the 87 bill. If there were about 100 or so in 89, I would expect about 200 in 91. I would expect the war to go on for some time, and I would expect those who see themselves as losers to offer all manner of reasons why we should go back to a system that is more expensive than we can afford. There is reason for hope that that may not occur. My favorite provision in this entire bill is one that has received very little notice. It is the provision that I hope justifies and ratifies all of the action by all of those who are responsible for this outcome. The problem has been that reform proposals about the insurance delivery system or about benefits have always been judged in the past on the basis of the self-interest of those that are involved. You could not find an objective forum within which to process these complicated political, technical, and economic issues. The genius of the Mahoney experience was to put people, although they have an interest, their interest is somewhat broader and somewhat more central to the purpose for which we're there. The genius was to have this group look at it from as apolitical standpoint as possible and negotiate between business and labor what it is you were going to do, because in the final analysis, what Oregonians want is your money's worth. Now, I think they struck that balance correctly. Well, this bill makes that committee, so to speak, or that business labor task force, a permanent part of the statutes. The intention is to create a more objective clearinghouse for legislative proposals where the viewpoint and perspective will be, are you getting what you pay for? What should business pay? Who should be included? What should an injured worker receive? And how is it going to be delivered? For those who have a commitment to intellectual honesty and civics in the old-fashioned sense, that holds the promise of the future. At least one of the candidates for governor has indicated that proposals that do not come through that clearinghouse and do not have the support of that group will be viewed with great suspicion and might have an accident on the way from the legislative halls to the Secretary of State's office. I hope that the other candidate will see the future likewise, and I hope to see the beginning of the rational resolution of the underlying question: how is it that we treat an injured worker? What is an injury? What is a fair cost? And what is a fair delivery system to provide those services? I want you to think with me for a moment what the alternatives to this were. At SAIF Corporation, which, as I say, is about a third of the system, has about a third of the business, using the business methods, which were to some degree responsible, and operating under the former system, even with the 8th highest rates, our actuaries in 1988 projected that on its present course, the Industrial Accident Trust Fund would run a deficit of $4 billion, that's with a B, by 1997. Today, I'm going to file our first quarter financial report with the Department of Insurance and Finance for 1990, and we will show a very small, single-digit net operating profit. That turnaround is due to the work of SAIF's employees, together and motivated by the expectation of long-term reform. To me, the future is not only that rates will level, I believe they will decline. They will certainly decline in relation to other places that do not opt for managed care and a commitment to charge business only that which results from risks that the business can control. And with that, I'll conclude and take questions if that's appropriate.
Thank you, Stan. As I mentioned at the outset, we will have a microphone in the center of the room for City Club members to ask questions. If you have a written question, please hold it up so that the staff can bring it forward. Our first question comes from our board host, Marge Abbott. Marge?
When we were talking before, you said that you can tell the occupation of any questioner from the very question that they ask. So I'll start out by saying I'm an independent consultant with my own small business. So I'm really quite conscious of all the horror stories about workers' comp and that have been documented well in the newspapers. So I'll start off by saying, what might this new system mean for the independent small business firm, especially one with not much of a track record? Alternatively phrased, what advice would you give to someone who is trying to obtain workers' comp for the first time, and has that changed with the new legislation?
Ironically, what is often cited as the cause or the provocation for this reform, that is the problem of insuring small business, ironically, the problem of insuring small business isn't really changed by this legislation in a direct sense. The problem for small business has been that a very small premium is placed against a very large risk and cost. And in other words, suppose you insure somebody for $250 and you stand to lose $2 million on a claim. That relationship makes very little sense. That problem was not tackled directly. That problem was not tackled directly by this legislation. It may be addressed indirectly in two ways. Insurance carriers like SAIF Corporation may be able to absorb better the losses from small business, which we are committed to doing, and we may strike a new balance between claims cost and premium, and in striking that new balance, it may be a better one. On small business accounts in 1988, SAIF Corporation, about 20,000 small accounts, took in $8 million and paid out 20. I know of no one who can operate a business with that kind of profile for very long. It simply won't work. If that relationship continues, there will continue to be problems. I hope and believe, and we are committed to trying to change that relationship so that we can reach those small businesses that are vital to our economy. What advice do I have? Forget the name assigned risk pool. Today, the rates in the assigned risk pool where any business can go are less than the rates charged by carriers. And if you can stand the name and some feeling of indignity, I guess, that goes with it, that's where I'd take my business. Why? Because all of the industry subsidizes the losses of the assigned risk pool. If you want subsidization that's fair, that is, all of the carriers pay it, that's the place to go. And I suppose the final thing is, when you have an employee that's hurt, the best advice I can give you is to do two things. And this will affect your experience rating. It will affect the premiums you pay. When an employee is hurt on the job, the owner, manager, operator of that business can do us all a favor by going to that employee soon and say, I'm sorry you're hurt. And the next thing you can say is, let's figure out a time when you can come back to work. You do those things, and your employees will feel better, and your business will do better, and your costs will be less.
Looks like we have a shy group today. I can't believe that with all the attorneys I know in the audience. Aha, that got two attorneys right up right now. Pamela?
Pamela Lesh, City Club member. Mr. Long, the last words out of your mouth before you sat down prior to the last question were risks that business can control. That caught my attention. Can you explain that a little bit more, particularly as it relates to claims for mental injury by workers?
Claims for mental injury is not one of my favorite subjects. They give me stress. I suppose one of the outrages of the week that I have kept track of is an example of what you're talking about. The board ruled that it was a compensable injury for a worker to be worrying about whether his union was going to negotiate a take-back. And the stress of worrying about the collective bargaining process was judged to be a compensable injury. I considered that nonsense and utter rubbish. The legislature cut back in '87 on your ability to worry and be compensated for worrying about losing your job, but somehow we were able to carve out a distinction and say if you were worried about losing less than your job, you could be compensated. The plain fact is, business can't do much about that. I mean, I don't know how you engage in the collective bargaining process without causing some apprehension. If that apprehension is compensable, you're going to have to pay. Now, in these changes are a series of things about medical findings and the like that may make it somewhat more difficult for that to occur. And there's also the other class of cases, and it would not be fair to end the question or the answer without mentioning there are businesses that do outrageous things to people. Not many, but some of the outrages on the other side are remarkable. There have been cases where even somebody who's hardened by a lifetime in the courtroom will turn around and say, how could you possibly treat people that way? So you have some cases that ought to be compensable, and frankly, too many in the past who should not. And certainly businesses can control those outrageous ones, and finding the place on the continuum where we want to put down the Oregon answer is really the heart of the matter. We've got a new place, we've put it down in a new place, and we'll have to wait and have some cases to see how we like it.
My name is Bob McMiniman, member. Stan and I happen to be a lawyer in my office, a small one, and a couple of my clients all were canceled by SAIF. None of us had had a loss, and we were canceled. The reason given is because we were small and the risk was too large. I've been associated with insurance for 40 years, and I thought the concept of insurance was to spread the risk and to do it over a large number of people. So therefore, if you had a small office, you should all get together and insure a whole bunch of small offices. To me, what SAIF did was, one, unconscionable, and two, it broke all rules of insurance as I knew it. So my question to you is, how do you justify canceling out the small offices like SAIF did?
I'm glad you asked me that question because it's an example of showing you why ignorance can be invincible. Now, it is assumed that insurance is a risk-spreading device, and therefore, if one would want more risks to insure. Think about it with me for a moment. If you insure a business for $250 a year or $1,000 a year, and you stand to pay out $500,000, say, you're at risk. Your company is at risk that this will happen, that a claim that costs $500,000 will occur. The risk of that is whatever it is when you insure one. When you insure two, what's the risk? Or you insure three, what's the risk? From an actuarial perspective, the more hard to insure accounts you insure, the greater jeopardy to your company. It's like people suggesting that you can make up for underpricing or selling at less than cost through volume. If we're at risk on a small account, the worst thing you want is another one. In fact, most companies look at it this way. They'll say, I can stand to be in this reverse lottery and insure maybe 4,000 or 5,000, particularly if I can get some other business with us. SAIF Corporation sells one product, workers' comp insurance. We offered to write every small business in Oregon that didn't have a bad safety record if we could charge $1,000. That request was turned down. We had two choices. Take $12 million that we could predict because of out of 20,000 accounts out of the Industrial Accident Trust Fund that's put away to pay for workers' benefit claims, or get out of the business. As difficult as it was for somebody that grew up in a small business environment as I did, we opted to get out of the business because I don't know any way to pay $20 million worth of claims on $8 million worth of premium. It may be unconscionable, but it was necessary.
Ginny Burdick, City Club member. How do you think the results of this legislation should be measured, and how long do you think we'll have to wait to get results that you will consider measurable?
I probably have a different view than the regulators have, and in the final analysis, we can't control rates. The old file and use system in Oregon is gone. We can propose rates, and the commissioner approves them. And most people don't think about it, but the commissioner's real job is protecting insurance companies often from themselves, so they don't underprice their product as part of the competitive struggle and put themselves out of business at the public expense. So one of the tough things insurance commissioners do, and I know because the insurance commissioner reported to me at the time I was the commerce director, one of the tough things they do is sometimes tell insurance companies they have to charge more. Well, that's just a way of saying I don't control the answer to that question. My own view is I can identify savings today. I can identify savings today in this measure that have nothing to do with predicting the future. I'll give you an example. SAIF Corporation has reserved for all of its claims about $1,400,000,000 worth. Some of what we have reserved, we know we're not going to pay if this legislation holds up, because that benefit's gone. Other things that we have not reserved for, like 110% increase in scheduled benefits, are there as well. We're going through this bill a piece at a time, figuring out the one-time ups in costs and the one-time savings in costs. We'll know that outcome fairly soon. As far as rates, it is my belief that no later than the October cycle, when the National Council on Compensation Insurance sets the pure premium rate, we'll have somebody's judgment of what the new base is. Insurance companies have the ability to make that calculation themselves and apply for a new pure premium rate. Whether SAIF takes that action remains to be seen. I am mindful of this fact. Organized labor does a good job of bargaining. The benefit increases went online on May 8th. We're paying the new benefit increases. Business has yet to receive its benefit. So my judgment is the sooner we deliver something, the more likely we can keep this balance intact.
Stan, Jerry Keene, member. Some of us that have looked at the bill in detail have noted what you noted, that it shifts a lot of what used to go on in the litigation room, the hearings room or court, over to the department, mainly to the Workers' Compensation Division of the Department of Insurance and Finance. Not a division that's inspired a lot of confidence in the past in fulfilling the duties that it already had. I know there's some new leadership over there, but I'm wondering what is SAIF's confidence level and outlook on how much of these new responsibilities can be competently and efficiently handled at the department?
Is there a way to duck that question? Well, I'll tell you. Some agencies have little experience in hurrying. DIF is one of those agencies that probably does have some experience in feeling a sense of urgency. They're on, probably the only people in the world right now that have a tougher job than some of the professionals at SAIF are the people at the Department of Insurance and Finance. Because they've got to get one heck of a lot of stuff done at an unbelievably short time scale. I think they can do it. I think they can do it. I predict that we'll have to do some things over again. Perfect is not an option when you manage 1,000 people. I don't know, there's 1,143 at SAIF. I can't remember what there is at DIF, 700 or 800 probably. Perfect isn't an option. There'll be mistakes. The boo birds will come out and say, see that mistake, and we ought to repeal this legislation and so forth. Oregonians are, for the most part, fair-minded people, and we may need to be a little patient. But in the final analysis, it'll work. I have as much confidence in the future of the Department of Insurance and Finance in terms of its ability to administer as I do with respect to any agency of the government. I'm very familiar with what they do, and the reservation you heard in my voice is present. I happen to be a shameless free marketeer at heart. Even though I've served in the government a number of times, competition's good for you. It sharpens you up. And, I mean, if I didn't have a competitor, I'd create one. Unfortunately, most of the government doesn't have competition. Here, the competition is the size of the problem, and Jerry, I think they're up to it.
I knew I'd get my chance. You mentioned that you didn't think until October that you would have a good handle on success or measurements of success for the system. The question is, will that be enough heading into the next legislature to counteract some of the arguments you may get on changing or revising the reform, if you will? And what will you think will be the top 2 or 3 issues that will be taken on in the next legislative session on workers' comp?
To be candid, SAIF Corporation is looking at when it's going to make its own response to what's occurred, and it may be before or after October. I don't know that as I stand here. I tried to hint that my hope, and just because you're the president of the company doesn't mean that it always does what you want or that you can do what you want. My preference is to act as soon as possible, because half the equation is getting its new benefits today, and I think it's imperative that we keep the faith and deliver something to business as soon as possible. October produces a rate change by January 1. An October NCCI determination would produce probably a January 1 rate change. We would be delighted to have confirmation from NCCI that rates should go down. My position is going to be as large as possible. We have no business charging the 8th highest premiums in the United States, period. There is none, except misguided political activity that occurred before the legislature stepped up and did a courageous thing on May 7th. Now, it may or may not be enough to hold off sort of a broad-scale counterattack. What I think is likely to be attacked is the managed care organization, because it's going to be very hard to get that online. The managed care organization requirement, it's going to be very hard to get that online. I think some of medical providers are going to find out, in fact, that their share is less than they think it's going to be, and I expect there'll be great wailing and gnashing of teeth over injured workers, brought to you by people who aren't themselves injured, but who hope to handsomely profit from those who are. I think those will be 2 attacks. I expect the claimants' lawyers to bring us every possible argument about why the changes in the litigation system are unwise, untoward, or somehow unhealthy. I know, in terms of the requirements of my profession, that it'll be impossible to have conclusive judgments between now and next July when the legislature adjourns, predicting a July adjournment. Nobody will know, and I hope that good people are patient. That doesn't mean that rates won't be adjusted. But that doesn't mean also that there won't be horror stories and unfortunate events that'll go amid a lot of things. Let me just tell you what I'm talking about. We have 50,000 cases a year at SAIF Corporation. 40,000 of them go without controversy. You've never heard that. There's 40,000 out of the 50,000 cases. There's no request for appeal. There's no argument. There's no hearing. There's no anything. They're done, and they're done right. Out of the 10,000, we settle about 4,000 or 5,000 of them early on. It's the other 6 that you hear about. And it's a few hundred out of those 6 that bring you time loss payments for people in jail and things like that that drive us all to abusing substances, I guess.
Mark Hammer, City Club member. Mr. Long, I'd be interested in your comments on what the new legislation will do in regard to SAIF and its major competitors. You might comment on whether you think there's been a level playing field competitive-wise and whether that's likely to change with the new legislation.
I don't know if there's been a level playing field because I'm not interested in that topic. Our business is not to prove, or to engage in the sort of gamesmanship theory of insurance delivery. If we have some advantages, we're glad to have them and tend to put them and hope to put them to a public purpose. I think the privates indeed have some advantages because there are different expectations for them. They don't have to comply with the public meeting law, the public records law, and they don't have 90 people who come every 2 years that believe inherently they could manage the company better than I can. So I don't know about who has the advantages. I know what the effects are. The effects of the new legislation improve SAIF's posture for a number of reasons. Our financial condition is improved and will be improved through some one-time adjustments because of our past reserving practices of reserving to final closure and ultimate cost of a claim when aggravation rights, for example, are being diminished. In addition, the strategic choices we made after I came to SAIF Corporation to centralize and to go from, for example, 3 early return to work specialists to 20, those philosophical choices are consistent with what appears to underline the Mahonia product. I mean, what we do at SAIF is fight suspect cases aggressively at the beginning, try to get them over as soon as possible, and try to provide quality care to injured workers for those cases we do accept. The number of cases we deny at SAIF Corporation has gone way up, several 100% since I've been there. The number of complaints we have about cases that are being treated have gone way down. So we've sort of specialized ourselves. I think the passage of this bill and this new formula, plus our own improvements, give us a very bright future. The thing that competitors can look forward to is choosing to meet us in the marketplace. And we're very proud of our products and services. I hope they are of theirs. They'll have to be, because competition in Oregon over insurance delivery will be fierce, as it should be. If I were to be restrained, or the company were to be restrained on the basis that somehow the playing field ought to be leveled, the price of insurance goes up. For example, people sometimes complain we're not subject to taxes. I don't mind paying taxes. I'll raise your premiums. Just simple as that. I don't know why you'd want to send money to Washington, D.C. instead of to injured workers, but impose taxes on us if you'd like. It's a zero-sum game for us. We're a nonprofit company, and our job is to drive the competitive forces in the marketplace so that the true cost, that we can get to as true a cost as possible.
Mary McCarthy, member. Some managed healthcare systems have lost money and gone out of business. What safeguards has the present legislation taken to guard against this?
A good question. First, what I see in this statute, what I can envision from the words, is different than anything I see now. I think its philosophy is different and its approach is different. Plus, remember in workers' compensation, there's no deductible, there's no copay, it's first dollar coverage, and as I say, it's a zero-sum game. If a managed care organization finds itself in financial jeopardy after a long-term excursion into the Oregon system in the future, it will be because it negotiated a poor contract. It will be because its executive function went awry. It will be because it was ineffective. I don't think that there's anything inherent in this system that's going to imperil the medical providers, provided they understand, as we try to understand, the difference between being efficient and being effective. They need to do the right things and they'll be fine.
As our last question today, we'll let you speculate here to complete your discussion. You mentioned where Oregon stood before the legislation was passed in terms of various statistics. How do you think that we will stand in terms of other states and relationships to other states with the new system? And will it be removed as something of an impediment to economic development here in Oregon?
I believe the answer to whether it will be removed as an impediment is yes. In the medium term of the 3 to 5 years, if there is no successful rollback. And I say that with a great deal of personal experience as a city attorney of Eugene and director of the Commerce Department and elsewhere, stubbing my toe trying to help site businesses in Oregon. Economic development has been adversely impacted by workers' compensation rates, because when a company does its due diligence here and sees what its risks and exposures are compared to somewhere else, there's a disincentive to be here. What I think is going to happen is our 150% of the national average in terms of disability cases, I hope, will decline to about 100%. In other words, about to 1, or even, or at the national average, if you will, to be more clear. That means about 1/3 of those cases have to go away. Now, it's interesting. I said the other day, and I became the subject of a lot of sort of backbiting because they said it. I said, I think this bill probably takes 20 to 30% of the cases out of the system. If it does, we'll get to national average rates, national average costs, and an improved competitive position vis-a-vis other states. Maybe it's wishful thinking on my part, but I think this bill may do it. And if it does, we'll all be better off because of it.
Join me in thanking Stan Long for an excellent presentation. Stan. And I hope you will all come back next week for Dr. Peter Kohler from Oregon Health Sciences University here at the Benson Mayfair Room, and we are adjourned.